Convoy days started the same way. Thin sky, flat plateau, dust blowing against the outer fence, engines coming up the switchback road in a line. I stood at the reception gate with my roster board and a guard squad behind me. Helmets straight, visors up, rifles slung safe. The facility for terminal containment sat behind us, low and heavy on the rock. Nothing lived out there, just the buildings, the perimeter, and the shaft in the middle of it all. Officially, it was a research and security site. Off-book, it was where the state dropped what it didn't want to see again. Enemies, contaminated personnel, witnesses whose memories were too accurate. All of them went through my corridors to the descent line. That morning I already knew the intake list by heart. 3 politicals, 2 internal security, 3 from outer districts, 1 former officer, and 1 indeterminate threat case. I checked my board anyway. Habit kept us alive and kept us paid. The first truck rolled up. The driver handed me his tablet with the transfer codes and custody signatures. I matched cases against my list, confirmed restraints, signaled the squad forward. "Line them out," I told Barlow. He was my sergeant, broad shoulders, short beard, eyes that saw everything. He barked names and numbers, pulled stretchers down the ramp, counted cuffs. The prisoners stared at the sky or the concrete. Some trembled. Some watched us with dead, hard focus. It didn't matter. Everyone rode the same route. "Transport clear," the driver called from the cab. I signed his board. "You can go." He pulled away, leaving us with 10 bodies on wheels and whatever history had brought them here. I stepped to the front of the line. Same drill. 2 per stretcher. No talk outside procedure. We go straight through, no stops. They nodded, nobody asking anything. They'd all done it before. We pushed the line into the facility. Through the outer security ring, down the intake corridor, past processing. No need for full intake on these cycles. Every man in this batch had been processed at holding centers down below before being sent up. My job was simple: escorts to the descent chamber and a clean handoff. Doors opened ahead of us under sensor locks. Cameras tracked us. Control watched from their monitoring room above the core. They had the physics and the numbers. I had routes and rifles. The descent chamber sat at the heart of the complex, wrapped around a vertical shaft lined with gravitic coils and armored rings. Inside the shaft, far below, a manufactured singularity hung in the dark, carefully fed and measured. The scientists called it a micro-black hole. Everyone else called it the hole. They told us that anything sent down the line went past the event horizon, patterns shredded beyond recall. Instant, painless, complete. On paper, nothing survived. I didn't think about the theory. I thought about forms signed, chains locked, transfer completed. After they passed through the final ring, they were gone. If I held to that, I slept. We rolled the stretchers into the descent chamber one by one. Control watched from the glassed booth on the upper level. The chamber crew checked restraints and position marks on the rails. The former officer was first. He watched everything with steady eyes. No begging, no appeals. His uniform had been stripped at the last sight. He wore the same plain jumpsuit as the others. "Unit Alpha," the chamber chief called from the console. "Ready." I touched the officer's wrist where the band carried his code. His lip twitched. "You know what's under there, Commander?" I tightened my grip. "Focus on the ceiling." He held my gaze a moment, then turned his head and stared up at the white panels above the rings. The chamber crew locked the final clamps. The rails slid him toward the shaft until his feet were just over the edge. "Begin sequence," Control ordered over the speakers. The coils below powered up. The officer's body stretched, not much, but enough that I saw it. Neck lengthening, torso narrowing, as if he'd been pulled through a long lens. Then the image snapped, compressed, and he was gone. I'd seen that 100 times. This time, there was something else. In the instant before he vanished, I glimpsed something behind him in the shaft, a narrow space, like a street lined with panels and doors stacked at odd heights. Human shapes watched from openings cut into the walls. I'd expected nothing but black depth and physics diagrams. Instead, the dark framed this crooked incline for a heartbeat. Then the field flared and cleared, leaving only the black throat down to the core. I stood there with my hand still out, fingers empty, feeling the vibration ease. "Unit Alpha complete," the chamber chief announced. I forced my hand down, stepped back, and signaled the squad. "Next." We ran the rest of the batch. Some cried, some cursed. One vomited from fear and acceleration when the coils started. The chamber crew handled it. Towels, mops, reassurance. By the time we sent the last one down, my nerves had steadied again. The officer's street went into the slot in my head where strange impressions lived, until I could forget them. We cleared the chamber, filed out through the access corridor, and handed weapons over to the armory. Another transfer complete. Another 10 people gone. I hit the barracks before shift change. Guards were in their usual positions, some at the common table playing cards with a deck older than most of them. Some cleaning rifles, some stretched out on bunks. This was the only place inside the facility that ever felt loosely human. "Any trouble while we were down?" I asked toward the table. "Perimeter quiet. Outer sensors threw a glitch. Control cleared it." One of the younger guards answered, tossing a card. "Normal." I nodded and headed toward my office. Paperwork waited. Transfer confirmations, movement logs, shift schedules. If the facility ran smooth, we heard nothing from the capital. That was how I liked it. I made it as far as the corridor outside the showers before the morning shattered. A shout down the hall, high and raw. "Commander!" I ran. Several guards had gathered near the shower entrance. One crouched beside a body on the floor. It was Collins, one of our mid-range men. Steady, decent with a rifle, quiet off duty. His body lay twisted in a way that made no physical sense. One leg bent under the hip at a sharp angle. One arm flung overhead, elbow pointing inward, shoulder out of place. His neck leaned too far to one side. His eyes were open. There were no balconies or open shafts above him, just flat ceiling and bright strips. "Clear the area," I ordered. "Nobody touch him." I scanned for blood. There was some at the corner of his mouth, a smear on the floor. No splatter pattern that would match a fall from height, even if there had been anywhere to fall from. "Who found him?" I looked around. A young guard, Pip, lifted his hand. "Me, I was coming off perimeter, he was just there." "You hear anything?" "No. 1 second the corridor was empty. Next second, this." He gestured helplessly at the body. I checked the walls. No marks, no bullet holes. No scuffs big enough to suggest a struggle. Just Collins on the floor. I keyed my comm. "Med, corridor outside showers. 1 guard down. Bring full kit. Control. Freeze corridor cams for the last 30 minutes and send to my terminal." While we waited, I knelt and checked Collins's pupils, then his ribs with steady fingers. Deep bruises had already started to bloom under the skin. The pattern was wrong. Not one impact, but layered and overlapping, as if many boots had driven into him from different directions at once. The med team arrived with their stretcher. They lifted him carefully. The chief medic's face tightened as he ran a hand over the injuries. "Looks like a beating under gravity," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Like he was trampled during a riot line." "There was no riot," I said. His eyes flicked up at me. "I know. I'm telling you what his bones show, Commander. You asked once why we write everything as self-inflicted, unless proven otherwise. This is why. I don't have a form for this. Run the full workup," I told him. "Send results direct to my station." They took Collins to the infirmary. The rest of the squad dispersed under my orders. I went straight to my office and pulled up the corridor feed. The camera caught Collins leaving the showers in his uniform, towel over his shoulder. He walked along the corridor, relaxed pace, bare head. No one else in frame. 10 steps from the camera, The feed blurred into static. Less than a second. When the image came back, Collins was dropping into view from above frame, body in that slow, stiff arc I'd seen when the officer stretched into the shaft. Limbs moving as if his body belonged to a heavier place that was pulling in a different direction. Then he hit the floor and lay still. No one else appeared. No objects fell. The doorways stayed closed. I replayed it 5 times. Same thing every time. Normal walk, static, wrong fall, control patched through. Commander, we see the same. We are logging it as sensor interference coinciding with a fall. It wasn't a fall, I answered. You saw the angle. Med can classify the injuries. Our job is to mark the timestamps and keep the system online. They cut the channel. I leaned back and let my head rest against the wall. The day had started like any other. Convoy, transfer, card game in the barracks. We were hours in, and I already had one impossible death and one impossible image in the shaft. I should have left it alone. I should have let the system write it as a fall and kept my guards away from the cameras. Instead, I went to look for myself. The corridor outside the showers was already cleaned. A faint trace of drying water, nothing more. Med had done its work. I checked the ceiling again. Solid. No hatches, no cracks. My boots felt firm on the floor. Nothing gave under my weight. As I turned to leave, I noticed scratches on the wall across from the shower entrance. They weren't random chips or boot scuffs. Straight lines had been scored into the paint in neat strokes. I stepped closer. The mark was a prisoner designation, a string of letters and numbers in the facility's intake format. Under that, a shorter code for a transfer batch. The strokes were shallow but clear, cut by something harder than a fingernail. I knew that designation. I'd carried it on a board half a year earlier. I'd walked that man down to the descent chamber and watched the coils take him. I remembered the shape of his face, the way his hands hadn't stopped shaking. I checked the hallway around me. Empty. No tools left out. No obvious sharp edges to carve with. I touched the scratch. The top layer of paint flaked away under my fingertip. Beneath it, the same code lay in older paint, as if the letters had been there through several coats and someone had just worn them down enough to show again. I pressed harder. More paint came away, revealing even older lines, cramped and faded. Above the prisoner's code, another mark had been scraped and half washed out. It looked like the beginning of a guard's designation. The first letters matched my own. I felt the corridor under me again, the weight of the facility and the shaft at its middle. I pulled my hand back, wiped paint dust on my pants, and keyed my comm. Maintenance, corridor outside showers, wall damage, mark it for repaint, priority low. If I treated it like nothing, maybe it would become nothing. It didn't. The day didn't stop for one dead guard and a scratch. Transfers didn't slow. Schedules didn't adjust. The facility absorbed incidents the way it absorbed people, quietly, with forms. Medical sent me the autopsy report on Collins that afternoon. Massive internal bruising, microfractures along the ribs and spine, no sign of external blows beyond the bruises, no foreign DNA. Their official line at the bottom: cause of death, self-inflicted trauma consistent with uncontrolled fall under altered field conditions. They wrote self-inflicted because no one could prove the opposite. They wrote altered field conditions because the gravitation readings near the core had shown a minor spike at the time of his death. The spike made no sense. The incident had happened far from the core. I stored the report in a private folder and shifted my focus to shift rotations. 1 impossible death was a problem. 2 would be a pattern. My job was to stop patterns before they reached command. 2 nights later, another guard woke in his bunk with fresh marks on his arms. He came to me before anyone else, sleeves rolled up, face tight. "Commander, look at this." Thick bands of blistered tissue wrapped his wrists and ankles. 4 neat rings. The skin inside was unbroken, but angry and raised. The marks matched the positions of the descent restraints exactly. You fall out of bed? I asked. He gave me a flat look. Not with cuffs on. I touched the edge of one band. It was warm, slightly swollen. The pattern was too precise to be random. It mirrored the indentations in the foam of our descent gurneys. I'd watched enough prisoners strain against those straps to know the marks. You dream anything? I asked. Nothing. Went to sleep after Corps Patrol. Woke up like this. Corps Patrol. I checked my roster. He'd been on a route near the descent chamber. Short shift, no anomalies logged. Med, I told him. Tell them you don't remember how it happened. Let them classify it however they want. Report back after. I logged his name. I started a list. The next incident happened a day after that. A guard, older, reliable, collapsed during a corridor walk. His partner said he just lost his footing and crashed into the wall. In the infirmary, scans showed a web of microfractures across his ribs and pelvis, like someone had pinned him under heavy acceleration for hours, then let go. He remembered nothing except walking, then darkness, then the infirmary lights. I added his name to the list and marked the time. Same pattern, no visible cause, injuries that matched our descent apparatus. 3 days into this string, I got my first order from above about it. The facility director called me into his office near the control suite. His space was neat, old-fashioned desk, shelves with printed manuals, a window that looked over the core building. He kept the window shutter halfway down even on clear days. He gestured me to the chair across from him. Guard Commander Sharpe, sit. I sat. He slid a tablet toward me. These are the medical reports from your unit for the last 7 days. The anomalies are noted. I skimmed. Collins, the restraint burns, the fractures, the phrases self-inflicted and unclear mechanism repeated without real conviction. These are under review at Central, he went on. The official stance is that we're seeing stress responses and minor field fluctuations, nothing systemic. That stance doesn't match what I've seen, I answered. He watched me. What you have seen are unexplained injuries and a camera glitch. Unexplained doesn't mean impossible. I'm not calling it impossible. I'm saying I don't have a cause I can control. That makes it a risk. He leaned back. Your responsibility is to tighten discipline and stop rumors. Medical will classify the injuries. Physics will tune the coils. Administration will deal with Central. And my men? Any guard who reports detailed visions or claims to be in 2 places at once goes straight to medical for evaluation. No exceptions. We're adding a category to the transfer schedules. Secondary transfer. For staff whose condition compromises operational integrity. You want me to send my guards down the line? We want you to keep the facility functional, he answered. If someone is seeing things that aren't there, if he can't walk a corridor without falling over, if he spreads stories about ghosts under the floor, then he endangers everyone. We don't have space or resources for long-term care. How many names? That depends on your reports. He looked at me until I nodded. Understood. Good. Keep your unit tight. Keep your logs clean. If Central sees confusion in our structure, they'll send in their own men, and you won't like how they handle it. On my way back to the barracks, I passed the corridor where I'd found the first scratch. Maintenance had scraped the wall smooth and covered it with a new layer of paint. No mark showed through. For now. Blackouts began the next week. The first one was on Barek, a guard who walked core-adjacent routes as smoothly as he breathed. He left the barracks for a 2-hour patrol around the inner ring. He checked in by radio at his appointed points. He returned on time. Nothing unusual. Later in the day, he came to my office with a blank look. I lost time. I looked up from my roster. Explain. I remember leaving the barracks. I remember the first checkpoint. After that, nothing until I was back at my bunk taking my boots off. You just told me you remember checking in at every point. He frowned. I know I did. I don't remember doing it. I pulled up his patrol file. There he was on camera, walking his route, nodding to other guards, scanning intersections. His movements were a little slower than usual, but otherwise normal. His check-in confirmations on the radio were brief and crisp. "It looks like you," I said, rotating the feed. "It doesn't feel like me," he answered. I watched him on the screen. His eyes during the patrol looked fractionally unfocused, enough to notice only because I was looking for it. "Anything else?" I asked. "Dreams, strange thoughts, new habits." He hesitated. "There was a street." "Where?" He looked at the floor as he spoke. "I was walking the inner ring, then I was elsewhere. A narrow incline built from panels and doors. I recognized some of them. Old cell doors, like at holding centers down below. They were welded together at angles. The incline climbed around a central dark space, like the shaft, but narrower. There were people on the walls, in openings cut into the panels. Faces I know from old intake photos. They watched me pass." "You talked to them?" "No, I just climbed. The ground felt heavy, like moving through water without the wet. Then I was at my bunk with my boots half off." I let him finish. Then I logged his account as quietly as I could, using the vaguest terms that still made sense. "Go to medical," I told him. "Report a blackout and nothing more. Let them run scans." He looked at me. "And if they ask about the street?" "If they don't need that detail to fix you, don't give it to them." He went. I pulled the gravitation logs for his patrol window. The physics console showed a slight ripple in the core field at the time he lost awareness. Not enough to trigger alarms, enough to be marked in their internal files. The physicist on shift, a thin man named Rahl, pinged me. "You have guards losing time during core ripples," he said without preamble. "Do you know how many?" "I know of one." "Why?" "We're seeing structured disturbances, not noise. They repeat at intervals that match historical intake spikes, transfers from years ago. Old patterns press outward when the field flares. The timing of Berwick's ripple matches a batch from the southern riots." "You keep intake timing mapped to field activity?" "Yes, it's part of the core safety model. You never asked." "I never needed to," I answered. "Until now." He hesitated. "Look, I'm not cleared to give you theory. What I can tell you is this. Whatever you're seeing in your unit, it correlates with changes down there. We can't treat them as separate problems." "File your charts," I told him. "If anything rises above Central's tolerance, they'll tell us what to cut." "Central is invested in the belief that nothing comes back up," he answered. "They won't want these charts." We cut the connection there. He'd already said more than his job allowed. Berwick wasn't the last. 2 days later, a patrol pair on outer perimeter duty returned with conflicting accounts of the same interval. One guard remembered the entire route. The other remembered leaving the barracks and then sitting in the mess with food he didn't recall ordering. On camera, he'd walked, talked, and eaten like anyone else. He'd answered direct questions from his partner. He couldn't recall any of it. When I pressed for detail, he mentioned a strange court. "Like a room?" I asked. "Not a room. Outside. A plaza built from beams and frames. There were platforms overhead made from our execution rigs, but they were arranged like stages. People stood on them in guard uniforms, but the cut was wrong, like the cloth had been stretched and refitted. They spoke from up there. The crowd below answered with prisoner codes, over and over." "How many people?" "Too many to count." "Faces you recognized?" "Yes, some from old files, some from here." I wrote that down in my private notes. I didn't include it in the official incident report I sent to the director. His version got the blackout, the memory gap, and the recommendation for observation. Nothing more. By the end of that week, my personal list of names was longer than I liked. Every one of them had some contact with core-adjacent spaces. Not everyone had visions, or at least not ones they admitted to. Many had unexplained injuries. All had been near the shaft more often than most. My sergeant, Barlow, joined them on the list after his first absence. He was checking locking bolts near the core access when he stopped responding on the radio. His partner found him standing in front of the heavy door, hand on the metal, eyes fixed on nothing. "Barlow," the partner called. No answer. He touched Barlow's shoulder. Barlow jerked like a man waking from a nightmare. His hand left a smear of sweat on the door. When he came to me later, his voice was flat. I was somewhere else. Where? In a plaza like the guard described. But I wasn't in the crowd. I was standing near a platform. There were figures up there. Hard to see them. Like they were built from pieces of our uniforms, not wearing them. They were reading from something. It sounded like our sentencing protocols, but none of the words landed right. You understand their meaning? Some. Enough to know they were passing judgment on someone in the crowd. The crowd answered with codes, prisoner designations, transfer references. They chanted those as if they were names. He rubbed his face. When I touched the core door here, it felt like the same metal in that plaza, the same chill. You remember the whole thing? He nodded. That's the difference between this and a dream, Commander. I can list the incline of the ground, the spacing of the beams, the order of the codes. I could draw you a map. I believed him. That didn't help. Belief didn't change orders. I marked him in my private list. I flagged nothing in the official file except brief dissociation near core access, recommend rest. I started sleeping lighter. The first official secondary transfer order hit my station the next morning. The document came directly from the director's office, marked high priority. It listed 6 names, all from my unit. All guards who'd reported blackouts, injuries or visions in the last 10 days. The instruction at the bottom was simple. Escort listed personnel to descent chamber under full restraint. Classification, compromised staff. Reason, risk to operational integrity. I stared at the names until the letters blurred. Beric, the guard with the restraint burns. The man from the feeding route who'd seen the court. 3 others. All men who'd stood in riot lines with me in other cities years before this posting. Men who'd taken bricks and bottles without flinching. Men who'd asked for this assignment because it was quiet and paid well. I read the note again. If I refused, I'd join them. If I delayed without reason, Central would send auditors. I sent for Barlow. He came in, eyes clear, hands loose, no sign on his face of the plaza under the core. You saw the order, I told him, sliding the tablet across. He looked once. A muscle jumped in his jaw. They expect us to march them down like prisoners. Yes. If we don't, they bring their own. He set the tablet down. If I were on that list, I'd want someone I know on the escort, not some outside unit that'll treat me like cargo. You're not on this one. He watched me. Yet. He wasn't wrong. We gathered a squad and went to the barracks. I did it clean. No time for whispers. I stood in the doorway with my roster and called names. Each man looked up, saw the folder in my hand and understood. Uniforms on, I told them. Gear up. Bring nothing but what you wear. One guard shoved his cards away and stood. One cursed under his breath. One went silent and started packing his few things into a bag until I stopped him. You don't need that. He stared at the floor. Right. I didn't tell them where they were going until we were halfway down the corridor to the core building. Some already knew. Secondary transfers, I said. Classification. Compromised. You know what that means. You're sending us down the line, one muttered. I'm escorting you under orders, I answered. I'll make it as clean as I can. They walked in silence after that. At the descent chamber entrance, we met the chamber crew. Some wouldn't meet the guard's eyes. Some looked openly uncomfortable. The monitor tech in the booth kept his gaze fixed on his screens. We strapped them in, one by one. They knew the procedure as well as any prisoner. Their wrists and ankles locked into the same clamps that had burned marks onto one guard's skin without hardware present. Any final requests? I asked. Regulation offered them that much. I expected last words for families, curses or silence. The first man looked at me and spoke in a voice that wasn't his. "The court convenes on the plateau," he intoned. "Guard Commander Arthur Sharpe, you stand charged with construction of the city beneath, stone by stone, by force of your hand and your signature." The words were precise, level. They rang against the concrete. I grabbed his shoulder. "Who's speaking through you?" He smiled with only half his mouth. "Those you dropped, those you processed, those you never saw. You fed us in lines. You sent us down in batches. You built us without knowing it." His eyes unfocused, then snapped back. The other half of his mouth caught up and fear flooded his face. "What did I just say?" He withdrew against the restraints, muscles straining. "Nothing you need to worry about," I answered. "Focus ahead." That was a lie. He'd spoken like someone who'd spent years reading procedures aloud in some other place. We ran the sequence. He stretched and compressed and vanished. The chamber shook slightly. Gravitation readings spiked, then leveled. The next man begged. The one after that cursed me. The last stared at the rings and kept his silence. By the end, my throat ached from issuing orders. My hands felt raw. My unit walked out of the chamber lighter by 6 men. In the barracks that night, the mood was tight. No card games, no easy talk. Men sat on bunks polishing weapons that didn't need polishing. "They'll pick us off one patrol at a time," someone muttered. "Shut it," another warned. "He's right there." I heard everything. I logged nothing in the official file. The director already knew the mood. He'd ordered the purge. He'd expect resentment. What he might not expect was what I did next. A week later, a second list arrived. Longer. 10 names from my unit, 5 from maintenance, 3 from medical. Secondary transfers again. Same classification. One name on that list stopped me cold. Keren. A quiet, reliable guard who'd never had so much as a warning in all the years I'd known him. His only mistake was standing near Beric during the blackout and being honest in his report. I checked his medical file. No injuries, no visions. The only flag was frequent exposure to core-adjacent routes. Somebody higher up was playing safe. Anyone who'd spent too much time near the shaft was suspect. I looked at Keren's name. I looked at another. Raggle, a guard with chronic lateness, a history of near fights, and a note about substance issues before his posting here. He'd also been near the core, but his file carried enough black marks that Central wouldn't blink if he vanished. If I swapped them, no one above would notice. The number to send down was fixed, but identities were lines in a database. The system worked on codes, not faces. It was a simple edit. One entry changed in my copy, one rooted version sent to the director's terminal. Raggle replaced Keren. The system accepted the list. I told myself it was the right choice. Keren was a stable piece of the unit. Raggle was a liability. By sacrificing the weaker link, I preserved the strength of the line. When I led the squad to collect the men, Raggle scowled but didn't resist. Keren watched from his bunk, confusion and relief mixed on his face. I didn't meet his eyes. We escorted the batch to the descent chamber, ran them down, same as before. Raggle cursed me with his last free breath. The coils took him. The next day I found his name carved under a bunk in the barracks. Not his bunk. An empty one we used for storage. The letters were neat, in that same careful hand I'd seen near the showers, paired with a line of symbols I didn't recognize. They had the cadence of legal code. No one in the unit admitted carving it. Maintenance hadn't been in there. We'd checked tool sign-outs the night before. No one had borrowed anything sharp enough. I called Barlow over. "What do you see?" I asked. He crouched, traced the symbols with his eyes, not touching them. "That's the same dialect I heard in the plaza," he murmured. "Their version of our sentencing language. It lists his name and role and the reason they pulled him. Substituted. Designated expendable by guard above." "Can you read all that?" "Not all. Enough. They keep records down there, Commander. They have their own courts, their own guards, their own lists. They've been watching us longer than we knew. I straightened. Get maintenance to sand it down. New paint. Won't change the fact it was written, he said. No, but it'll keep the barracks from staring at it all shift. We covered the mark. The knowledge stayed. A week later, another guard came back from core access with both knees shattered. No fall, no collision. He just dropped mid-step, and a raw sound ripped out of him. Scans showed fractures that matched someone forced to kneel under a heavy field for hours. Under a service panel near the core, I found another carving. My own name this time, full and clear. Rank. Unit. Under that, the first line of a sentence in the inner dialect, cut off halfway through as if whoever had been doing the work had been interrupted. I shut the panel, locked it, marked the area as off-limits due to loose wiring. From then on, I stopped pretending it was random. The city below didn't just pull at those we sent down. It watched the ones who chose who went. The facility itself began to bend. At first, it was small. Complaints from engineering that the stairs between levels in the core building didn't match the blueprints. Some people counted 20 steps between landings, others counted 22. Some swore they took longer to climb than to descend. It's tape error, one mechanic argued. The tape's not wrong, another snapped. You can feel the distance. It changes. I walked those stairs myself. Going up, my legs burned by the time I reached the second landing. Going down, it felt shorter, like the landings were closer together. When I measured, the tape came out the same number every time. That didn't reassure me. Floor plates near the core took on a slight tilt. Tools rolled toward walls when dropped, instead of toward the shaft at the center. Carriages on wheels drifted during idle moments, slipping sideways against their brakes. Control logged the variations as micro-field drifts. Physics promised adjustments. Maintenance chalked cracks in the concrete and patched them. None of it changed the fact that the building no longer matched its own diagrams. One afternoon, I watched a technician drop a wrench near the core access. It hit the floor, bounced, then slid along an odd curve, tracing an outline my mind recognized before I could stop it. The length and shape matched a descent carrier frame. I'd handled enough of them to know. Later, in a cleaning cycle, a bucket tipped near the core door. Water spread along tiny channels no one remembered in the floor, drawing a rough grid. One of the younger guards knelt and stared. "That looks like the street map from my blackout," he whispered. I told him to get up and finish the cleaning. Rahl from physics came to me again, thinner than before, dark hollows under his eyes. "The core is responding," he told me in the corridor outside control. "Not just to mass we send down, but to our schedules. We change a transfer date, the field ripple pattern shifts before the date arrives." "It reads the lists," I answered. "It reacts to them. That's worse. It knows intent, not just mass." "Can you prove that?" "Not in a way Central will accept. Not without losing my access. But the charts are there." "Store them somewhere private," I told him, "in case someone needs them after we're gone." "After we're gone?" "If this keeps building, they'll either shut the facility or double down." He grimaced. "You know which way they'll jump." In the middle of this, my own first blackout hit. I was walking the corridor between the core access and the ward where we held high-risk prisoners. The route was one I could have followed blindfolded. I'd walked it hundreds of times. One step I was on smooth concrete with steel doors and lights. The next, my foot came down on a surface built from welded panels, each one a familiar door or frame from holding centers, cells, and execution rooms. They'd been bolted together at sharp angles to make an incline that rose around a central darkness. I knew it at once. The inner city. People moved along the walls, bodies stretched, narrowed, compressed. Faces wore the marks of long gravity distortion, elongated jaws, limbs with extra joints. Others looked too compact, as if everything had been pushed inward. Many of them wore fragments of facility uniforms, cut and refitted into new shapes. They watched me as I walked. Their eyes tracked my standard-issue boots, my holstered sidearm, my rank tabs. I recognized faces from old transfer files. The officer from the convoy day. A political organizer who'd spat at me during his escort and quoted slogans until the coils took him. A technician from our own core staff who'd been listed as secondary transfer months earlier. "Commander Sharpe!" someone called from above. I looked up. A platform hung over the plaza, built from execution frames bolted side by side. Figures stood on it, robed in patched cloth made from old guard jackets. I raised a hand to shade my eyes. The central darkness swallowed most of the light, leaving them silhouettes. "We're not done with your record," one of them called. "You will stand here again in full." Their voices rolled down the incline, wrapped in a cadence that reminded me of sentencing hearings in the capital, but twisted. It sounded like a mockery of our language, and an honest version of theirs at the same time. I blinked, and my hand hit smooth concrete. A guard in front of me flinched. "Commander, you closed your eyes and stopped moving." "How long?" "Maybe 5 seconds." The corridor was normal again. Steel doors, lights, no welded panels, no platforms, just the faint rattle of equipment in the distance. "Carry on," I told him. I went straight from there to archive storage. The facility kept physical backup of certain records in an old room near the outer ring. Shelves lined with printed reports, aging tablets, boxes of evidence no one wanted to think about but couldn't destroy without authorization. I keyed in, pulled files based on incident tags that matched our recent anomalies, unexplained injuries, field hiccups, staff blackouts. The indexing was sloppy. The older reports used different codes. It took hours. In the end, I found what I needed. A stack of reports from over a decade earlier, when a previous guard commander ran this place. They described coordinated hallucinations among staff near the core. Guards who all saw the same corridor that didn't exist. Medics who woke with restraint marks they'd never worn. Engineers who swore the building layout was shifting. The previous commander had recommended reducing transfer frequency, rotating staff off the plateau more often, and rethinking the use of the singularity for permanent disposal. The director then had filed a counter-recommendation that the anomalies were stress-related, that staff who reported them should be removed, and that transfer pace should, if anything, increase to prevent backlog. Central had backed the director. The guard commander's record ended a few weeks later with the single line, "Retired to secure facility." Cross-referenced with descent records, his designation appeared in a list of internal security transfers, routed through our own shaft. We'd been here before, different men. Same response. I put the files back. I went to my locker in the barracks. Inside, on the inner wall, I took a nail and started scratching my own list. Names, locations, times, injuries, visions, core spikes, transfer orders, rough arrows connecting them. From that vantage point, the pattern looked less like isolated accidents and more like an indecisive war. Every time something stirred below, Central dumped more people into it. Every time they did, the inner city learned more about us. The next break came through the prisoners. We had a holding block on the mid-level for incoming transfers from regional sites. Most stayed there only long enough to be recorded and slotted into the next descent cycle. Some waited longer if Central wanted further interrogation. Feeding times in that block were dull. Guards on the route rolled carts along the row, opened slots in the doors, shoved trays in, closed slots. Prisoners sometimes tried to talk, sometimes hit the doors, sometimes sat in corners and did nothing. It was rote work. Good for rookies, steady for old hands. That day, it went sideways. I was on the upper catwalk, watching from above. I liked to put eyes on the block once a week to make sure no one got lazy. Barlow led the squad below. 3 guards with rifles, 2 pushing the cart. They moved in rhythm. Halfway down the line, 7 prisoners stepped away from their walls at the same moment. They moved with the same pace, same angle of foot, same tilt of head. Every one of them reached the little window in the door slot and looked out. Barlow froze mid-step. The guards with him raised rifles instinctively. The prisoners started to speak, together, not shouting, not pleading, a measured cadence. "Article 7, they intoned. Transfer authority from regional to facility for terminal containment. Escort responsibility carried by Guard Commander Arthur Sharpe. Rank, file, assignment. Sentences executed through descent line under his oversight." They listed names, mine, Barlow's, the guards on the route. They recited our full designations, down to training site and recruitment district. They paired each of us with the prisoner batches we'd escorted. The detail was exact. I felt the metal rail under my hands. "Quiet down or you lose this meal," one of the guards below snapped, stepping closer to a slot. The prisoner behind the door stared straight through him. "You marched us in chains," he intoned. "You held pens while we signed acknowledgement. You pulled straps over our wrists. You watched us pass the last ring." His lips stretched, skin distorted, as if pushed by a force from inside. His eyes shot sideways for a second, misaligned behind their sockets. On the camera feeds, his face blurred, stretched lengthwise, then compressed. "Rifles ready," I called down. "Non-lethal first. If they move, drop them." Barlow lifted his hand in a small gesture to acknowledge. The prisoners continued. They shifted from transfer articles to something else. A hybrid of our sentencing protocols and a new set of rules. They named infractions I'd never heard of. Disorderly escort pattern, negligent mass distribution, ill-considered substitution. The guards stepped back from the doors unsettled. One of the prisoners extended his hands through the slot as far as the restraints allowed. The air around his wrists twisted. The metal edges of the slot warped around his skin without cutting it. The nearest guard staggered back as if shoved. His arm bent at an angle it shouldn't reach. A sharp crack filled the block. He went to his knees, rifle clattering beside him. "Contact!" Barlow's voice cut through the noise. "Use force!" The guards opened fire through slots and at hinges, tight bursts. Prisoners jerked and fell out of view. One kept reciting even as rounds tore through his chest. His voice only stopped when his jaw dropped loose. Another guard ran in to pull the injured man back. As he grabbed his harness, an invisible impact slammed into his ribs. He wheezed and collapsed against the wall. The cameras caught nothing between prisoners and guards. No projectiles, no hands, just sudden force. When the noise stopped, 4 prisoners lay dead on the floors of their cells. 3 guards were down, 1 with a broken arm, 2 with injuries that would later show up as the same kind of kneeling fractures we'd already seen. I called for med. I called for cleanup. I called the director. By the time we cleared the block, new carvings had appeared under the bunks of the dead prisoners. Guard names, our names, written in that same careful style, paired with inner legal shorthand. Control reported a major core spike during the incident. The physics team logged it as synchronized surface event. The director met me in the corridor outside the block. "This stays internal," he told me. "We report prisoner agitation and a brief use of force. Nothing about voices, nothing about our names." They recited the full escort histories of men Central will never bother to memorize, I answered. They named me as executioner. "Your job has always been ugly," he replied. "This doesn't change that. We can't start telling Central that their miracle disposal system is breeding a city at the bottom of the shaft. They built their politics on the idea that these people vanish when we drop them. And if the city reaches up here and drags one of them down in person, then we'll have failed at our only task," he said. "And they'll erase this entire plateau to cover it, including you and your men." He looked tired. "We need to manage this, Arthur, not expose it." Management in this context meant more secondary transfers. Barlow's file reached the top of that list. By then, His blackouts had grown worse. He'd be mid-checklist, then freeze. His eyes would go distant. His lips would move in rhythms that matched the inner court's cadence. When he came back, he remembered both positions, standing in front of me in a corridor above and standing near a platform down below, listening to judges call my name. It's not random anymore, he told me one night in the barracks office after most of the unit had gone to sleep. Down there, they know our routines. They know when patrols run, when feeding cycles start, when transfers happen. They time their surges to ripple up through those spots. We already guessed that. Guessing and standing in it are different, he answered. They have their own guard units, men in warped versions of our uniform who keep order in those streets. They speak of you as if you're one of us and one of them. They don't discuss you as an abstract problem. They track what you do. You approve or disapprove of my choices? I understand them, he replied. That's worse. That last line hurt more than anger would have. The secondary transfer order naming him came through 2 days later. High priority, marked with a note. Advanced contamination, removal recommended before further spread. The director called me in again. Your sergeant is a risk, he told me. He's the bridge for half the stories running through your unit. He remains, and we lose control. He goes, we may cut some of the lines. You don't know that, I replied. We know leaving him here hasn't helped. We have new instructions from Central. They've approved a stabilization protocol. He tapped his board. A detailed plan projected between us in the air. I skimmed. They wanted a large-scale purge, a concentrated series of staff transfers under a revised encoding method that the physics team had been tinkering with. The theory was simple. Compress entangled patterns harder, faster, to reduce upward influence. In practice, it meant sending a significant fraction of our own people down the shaft in a short window. You want to fix the leak by throwing more bodies into it, I said. We want to prevent collapse, he answered. We won't get permission to shut the facility. The singularity is too valuable. This is the only measure they'll fund. And you want me to carry it out. You're guard commander. This is your function. He watched me. You've always done what needed doing, Arthur. That's why you're up here instead of still on riot lines down below. Do it again. The quicker we run this protocol, the sooner the pressure may ease. And if it doesn't, then Central will find someone else or something more drastic. You wouldn't like their version. He left Barlow's file on the desk. A quiet wait. I took it back to my office. I sat with it longer than I'd sat with any document in years. If I refused, I'd go down with him. Someone else would take my place and run the same lists with less care. If I complied fully, I'd escort a man who'd held my back in alleys and corridors for a decade. A man whose only crime was seeing too much, down into a city that had already written his name on its roll. If I tried to fight both sides, I'd break. In the end, I did what I'd always done. I chose the narrow path that gave me the most control for the least visible disobedience. I agreed to run the stabilization protocol. I took charge of the escort scheduling. I insisted that all transfer lists run through my office for security verification. The director accepted that without question. He preferred one neck to hold responsible if things went wrong. I went to physics and spoke with Rahl. They want to compress patterns harder, I told him. Can that sever some of the linkage? Compressing harder will change the shape, he answered. Whether that weakens or strengthens the connection depends on what the thing below needs. They don't care about that part. What do you care about? Survival, he replied. For me. For the core. Maybe in that order. I need you to adjust coil timings, I told him. Slightly. Enough to change the surge pattern. On paper, it'll look like you're following the new central guidelines. In practice, it might put more strain on whatever channels the inner city uses to drag at us. Maybe we get a break. Maybe they get a fracture. And if I miscalculate, we tear the shaft open. Then the plateau ends, I said. You've always known that was a possibility. He stared at his screen for a moment, then rubbed his eyes. I can offset the timing by fractions, enough to misalign some of the feedback without collapsing the field. It's still a risk. Everything we're doing is a risk, I answered. At least this way, the risk has a purpose beyond pleasing a committee in the capital. He gave a thin, humorless snort. All right, bring me the final schedule. I'll tune the coils to your pattern. This was how we went into the last phase. Half in obedience, half in sabotage, fully in ignorance. The first waves of the stabilization protocol went about as well as anyone could expect from a plan that tried to fix a collapsing bridge by increasing traffic. We sent down technicians who'd worked near the core for too long, medics who'd treated too many strange injuries, guards who'd blacked out more than once. We strapped them to carriers and watched the revised field take them. The coils flared sharper under Raal's new timings. The chamber shook. Control reported surges that pushed their instruments to the edge of tolerance. Lights in the facility stuttered, bright, then dim. Doors vibrated in their frames. For a few seconds after each transfer, gravity felt like it had to remind itself which way was down. In between cycles, we got reports of minor incidents everywhere. A prisoner walking through a corridor, then suddenly standing on the ceiling for a heartbeat before dropping. A cart rolling uphill on its own in a storeroom on the far side of the complex. A control officer hearing his own voice coming from a console before he spoke. Field spikes tracked with every transfer. The inner city reacted instantly to each new mind sent down. We pushed through the first 2 days without losing the shaft. Then Barlow's turn came up. His name sat at the top of the next batch. Central wanted him removed early. Their logic was sound from their view. He was a vector for stories. If they cut the vector, they might cut the spread. From my view, they were about to remove the only man who could describe what lay under the floor in enough detail to give us any chance of understanding it. I walked to his bunk in the barracks myself. He looked up as I stepped into the doorway. He must have recognized the way I carried the board. "So it's time," he said. I leaned against the frame. "You know I tried to defer it." "I never expected anything else from you," he replied. "You still have orders." "I do. And if you ignore them, we both go down, and someone hungrier for promotion runs the next list." "That's also true." He took a breath. "All right, Commander. Let's do this while I still know who I am." We moved through the corridors with a small escort. The routes felt wrong. Corners seemed to lean away or toward us by degrees my body felt even if my eyes didn't see them. Near the final ring before the descent chamber, a surge hit. The floor under us heaved. For a moment my boots lost full contact. The corridor around us stretched and narrowed. The steel walls dissolved into welded panels. We were back on that incline in the inner city. Figures lined the path. Citizens of the compressed world. Their bodies bore the marks of long years under skewed gravity. Extra joints where arms had bent too often under uneven pull. Vertebrae that jutted in new places. Some wore belts and patches that had once been part of our uniforms, now worn as badges. They watched us pass without moving aside. We walked through them and through their alleys, overlapping. "Commander Sharpe!" a voice called from the side. I turned my head. A face I knew from an old autopsy report stared back. The prior guard commander. His features were longer now, his eyes set deeper. He wore a version of our rank tabs, made from carved metal, hanging at his throat. "You finally come down the corridor you mapped for us," he observed. I didn't answer. My mouth was dry. Barlow walked beside me, 1 foot in each world. His shoulders carried the same tension they always had on riot lines. "You can still stop," he told me quietly. "You could turn me around, barricade the shaft, fight both sides." "And what would that buy us?" I asked. 1 day? 2? Central would bomb this plateau flat. The city below would still be there, hanging on whatever's left of the field. He let out a short, rough exhale that might have been a laugh. So instead you give them what they want. Me. A man with both their maps in his head. You're not a gift, I answered. You're a lever. I don't know how yet, but you are one. The corridor flickered back. Steel walls, concrete. The guard behind us stumbled and cursed. His rifle clanged against the wall. Everyone all right? I asked. Still here, he grunted. We reached the descent chamber. Alarms pipped on the control board as we entered. Field readings danced higher than they should. Commander, the coils are running hot, the chamber chief warned. Ral says we're at the edge of the safe curve. We only need one more cycle on this band, I told him. Then you can cool it. Barlow stepped onto the carrier frame without being instructed. He lay back, eyes on the ceiling. You remember that riot in the harbour district? He asked, still staring upward. Yes. You told me then that our job was to stand in the space between orders and the crowd and make sure both believed we were solid. I did. Same job here, he said. Space is just smaller. He gripped the side of the frame. I placed my hand on his wrist, more to anchor myself than him. The chamber chief locked the restraints, ankles, wrists, chest. Barlow's hands tensed under mine. His eyes blinked once, then steadied. Control's voice came over the speaker. Sequence armed. On your word, Commander. This is secondary transfer under stabilization protocol, I answered. Unit Delta, proceed. The coils began to ramp. Barlow's body started to stretch, the way everybody did when the field grabbed it. Our eyes met. Through that connection, something opened. For a heartbeat, I was no longer in the chamber. I was standing on a platform in the inner city, looking down at a dense crowd of faces. Judges in warped uniforms stood beside me, reading out my record. Transfers under Arthur Sharpe, they intoned. Batches from the southern riots, from the coastal uprisings, from internal security purges. Guards sent down by his hand under the label of contamination. Substitutions made to protect some, sacrifice others. They listed each name I'd swapped, each one I'd walked to the shaft. They didn't use the words guilt or innocence. They used the word weight. Barlow stood before me in that court, not bound, just present. You built us, one of the judges observed. Every signature a brick, every escort a beam. Now you will serve as gatekeeper, whether you wish it or not. My hand still gripped Barlow's wrist in the chamber. The skin under my fingers felt both solid and stretched, like warm taffy under tension. He spoke quietly, words only I could hear. They're not going to let go of you. You know that, no matter what happens now. I know, I answered. The thought hit then, clean and cold. If I pulled back, if I aborted the sequence, the field surge might find another way to discharge. It could rip the shaft side open, throw the inner streets into the facility like rubble. It could take whoever happened to be standing near any core-adjacent space and drag them down in a chaotic wave. If I pushed through, if I completed Barlow's transfer under these altered conditions, the pressure might focus on him and me. The breach would tighten around a single link instead of tearing everything wide. It wasn't a noble calculation. It was practical. That's the only kind I knew. Lock sequence, I ordered. Full power. The chamber chief hesitated. Commander, the readings, that's an order. He nodded and hit the control. The coils roared. The field slammed down. Barlow's body thinned, then snapped inward. His face blurred. His wrist under my hand vanished into something like a line, then nothing. For a split second too long, my hand kept going, fingers plunging into a dark, heavy absence that clamped around my bones. Pain surged through my arm and up into my chest. Every joint in my body flared as if being twisted in different directions at once. The inner court flashed again. The judges turned their attention from Barlow to me. You have chosen, one announced. You complete the pattern. You hold the gate. The platform shook. Beams buckled around us. Citizens in the crowd staggered but didn't fall. Their faces lifted as if in expectation. In the chamber, the floor under my boots cracked. Tiles split. Equipment racks shifted. Consoles groaned and slid a few centimeters out of place. Control's voice tore through the speaker. Field up 30% above projected curve. We are losing containment margins. Hold it, I snapped. Ride it out. Don't kill power unless the core vector shifts. Raal's voice cut in, tight and strained. I can damp the outer rings, but the central feed is feeding back. Something is pulling instead of dropping. I know what's pulling, I answered. Give it what it wants, for now. That went against every line of training he had. He did it anyway. The outer rings eased a fraction, letting the central axis carry more force. For a moment, I felt like a wire stretched between the chamber and the court. The weight of all the people we'd ever sent down hung on that wire. It pressed through me, trying to find a path. Then the pressure reduced, snapped into a new balance. The tremor in the floor eased. The lights steadied. Consoles slid back into positions that didn't match their original markings, but were still usable. Barlow was gone. His designation blinked from the chamber board to the core records. The field settled into a new pattern, altered but stable. The shaft held. I crumpled to my knees. My arm hung numb at my side. Every bone felt bruised from the inside. Med rushed in. Someone pressed a mask over my face. Someone else checked my pupils. A stretcher appeared. As they lifted me, I heard the director's voice distantly from the doorway. Containment preserved. Good work, Commander. Good work. I just fed my sergeant into the court that had claimed me as their gatekeeper. I woke in the infirmary sometime later with my arm in a brace, ribs taped, and a ringing in my ears. The med chief looked down at me. You got caught in a field misalignment. You're lucky you didn't liquefy. How long was I out? I asked. Less than a day. We stabilized your vitals. The facility held. Core? Contained. Field readings different but within acceptable range. He hesitated. Commander, during your unconscious period, your brain scan showed patterns we haven't seen before. Unusual coherence. Nothing like a normal coma. I closed my eyes. I knew what that meant. I'll write you up as temporarily incapacitated due to core overload, he went on. Central doesn't need more details than that. The director visited next. He stood at the foot of my bed, hands clasped behind his back. You kept the shaft intact under a field spike that could have flattened the building, he told me. Central is satisfied. More than that, they're intrigued. Intrigued. The altered field behavior under the stabilization protocol suggests new ways to interact with the inner region, he continued. The scientists are already drafting proposals. Central wants the facility to study, not just erase. That means we stay open. It means your job continues. We just turned this place from a disposal pit into an experiment, I answered. He shrugged. We always were an experiment. Now they're just more honest about it. And what about my unit? We lost people. We always do. We'll get replacements, some from internal security, some from the army. In the meantime, we'll consolidate around the core. Central has approved the construction of a dedicated ward above the descent chamber, a place to house and observe staff with entanglement symptoms. They want you to command it. A hospital. A ward, he corrected. Half infirmary, half prison. The collapse ward, they're calling it. You'll manage the people who stand with one foot in each place above and below. You have more experience with that than anyone else now. He left without asking whether I wanted the assignment. There had never been a choice. During my recoveries, I spent more time in that inner city than I did awake. In the court, they had me stand before them again. They read out my choices, the early obediences, the later substitutions, the decision to complete Barlow's transfer under a dangerous field curve. You don't move out of principle, one judge observed. You move to keep the structure intact, to preserve a certain pattern of order. That makes you useful. Useful to whom? I asked. To both sides, he answered. The plateau above and the streets below. You select mass for us and maintain calm for them. You are a hinge. Hinges hold after doors fall. They assigned me a role there too. Not as a prisoner, not as a full judge. Something in between. A man with keys. When I woke for the last time in the infirmary, they handed me the paperwork for my new post. Months later, I walked the corridor of the collapsor ward with my arm in a brace and a clipboard in my hand. The ward sat directly above the descent chamber, built in a rush once Central approved the design. Steel and reinforced glass, observation rooms around a central monitoring station, staff quarters on one side, controlled cells on the other. We filled it quickly. Guards who drifted in and out of cutscenes during their shifts. Nurses who woke with fresh restraint marks. Technicians who could predict core spikes before the instruments. Prisoners who spoke in the inner dialect more often than their native languages. My job was to keep them contained, to observe, and to report, and quietly to decide who could still serve above and who needed to join the crowd below. I walked past a cell where a former guard sat with hands folded, eyes fixed on an empty corner. He spoke under his breath, reciting codes and dates. His voice matched the cadence of the inner court exactly. On the monitor outside his door, gravitation readings spiked in low pulses whenever his mutterings peaked. In another room, a prisoner lay on a bed, wrists strapped for safety. Every few minutes his fingers spread and traced patterns in the air that matched the street grids I'd seen below. The motion carried weight, as if his fingertips were dragging against something heavy. We monitored them all. Heart rates, brain activity, core correlation. Some we kept stable with drugs, some with restraints alone. A few we walked under armed escort to the descent chamber when their patterns ran too close to the core's surges for comfort. Every transfer now had 2 sets of logs, the old ones for Central, listing names and codes, and new internal ones, noting field behavior, inner reactions, and how much the inner city seemed to swell. I was the one who signed both. The facility changed around us. The parts built for the ward had details that matched the inner architecture without any engineer admitting it. Support beams arranged in the same spacing as court platforms. Observation windows placed to overlook the rings in frames that resembled homemade benches I'd seen in the plaza. Sometimes, during quiet shifts, I stood at the main junction and let my awareness slip. The corridor around me blurred into the incline below. Citizens walked through me on their own routes. I could feel the overlap in my bones. In those moments, I saw 2 sets of staff at once, guards above, citizens below. Some were the same people, just at different stages. Central's reports framed it as progress. Collapsor ward functioning as intended, they wrote. Inner zone influence monitored and partially harnessed. Disposal function maintained. No escape events recorded. They treated the city we'd fed for decades as a resource now. Something to manage, prod, and maybe weaponize. All they needed was a man willing to stand in the overlap and keep choosing. That man was me. One evening, late in a long shift, I walked a maintenance corridor behind the ward's central office. Only staff came back here. Cable runs, service panels, dust on the floor from hurried construction. A patch of wall caught my eye. Raw metal, no paint yet. Scratched. I stepped closer. There it was. My name, full, proper. Arthur Sharpe, rank, assignment. Under it, a sentence in the inner dialect, neatly finished this time. I couldn't translate every symbol, but I understood the meaning. It listed my period of service above, my new role as ward commander, and my function below as selector and gatekeeper. It marked my sentence as ongoing, without a fixed end. The scraped letters were old by the look of the metal underneath. Older than the ward itself. As if the wall had been marked before anyone built this corridor. My spine cooled. I touched the scratches. The surface felt solid, the grooves shallow. No give, no heat, just rough metal. We'd always been coming here, all of us. The facility had been moving toward this state since the first man went down the shaft. I stepped back and closed the panel. On my desk in the office, I kept a larger version of the chart I'd started in my locker. Names of those we'd lost, times of core spikes, field patterns, construction phases, central directives, arrows linking decisions to outcomes both above and below. I updated it that night. I added a new column, ward transfers recommended. Under it I listed 3 names, a guard whose absences left entire patrol segments blank, a nurse whose arm had developed restraint marks matching patients she treated, a physicist who spent too much time watching the core readouts with an empty expression. I knew each of them. I knew their strengths and weaknesses. I knew how their removal would affect the ward. I also knew, from the subtle changes in the core charts, that the inner city tugged hardest on them whenever surges hit. Keeping them above meant the facility would feel those tugs harder. Sending them down would feed the city more but might smooth the surface. It was the same balance I'd always worked. Nothing had changed except the scale. I sat there for a long stretch, pen in hand. In the end, I marked 2 for transfer and 1 for retention. I printed the list, walked it to the descent chamber, handed it to the chamber chief. "New staff transfer protocol," I told him, "under ward authority." He nodded, eyes tired. He would strap them in. He would watch them stretch and compress. I would feel in some hidden place the way the inner city shifted to accommodate them. When I returned to my office, reports from Central waited in my queue. They praised the ward's performance. They highlighted the reduction in unscheduled incidents. They approved my continuation in post, with a note about a possible commendation if trends held. I closed the messages without answering. Outside my window, the plateau lay quiet and blank under a hard sky. The facility's lights shone steady. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, the ward was full. The core hung beneath us with its patient, dense mind. The city below walked its welded streets. The courts continued their work. I sat at my desk with the next stack of forms, another roster to adjust, another line of lives to bracket and move. This was what my behavior had earned, a long tenure between 2 worlds, feeding one to keep the other from noticing what it had built. I picked up my pen and started on the next list,